How did he get on?
The search for his killer reveals a laundry list of potential suspects.
Yeah? I swear, I didn't even touch the guy.
It seems very possible it could have been a revenge killing.
But who really wanted the victim dead?
Whoever did this is incredibly violent and incredibly dangerous.
I ain't playing. Come back here and kill you too.
Sheriff's Office of the War, come to the door.
Go, 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 go.
Step out of the car! Out of the car!
Emotion is the driving force behind violent crime. Emotion doesn't consider consequences. It doesn't consider judgment. It's just emotion. If your behavior causes emotion to rise to a critical level, you are at personal risk.
It's a beautiful afternoon, and Dana Marchetti and her brother Paul are taking full advantage with a hike off Rampart Range Road, just outside the city of Colorado Springs.
Rampart Range Road was a really nice place. You're out in the woods, you can go and look at the views and stuff like that. If you went to the north, you could go up towards a whole bunch of hiking, and then if you kind of went down towards Rampart Range Reservoir, you could ride bikes there, and that road would take you all the way down into Garden of the Gods in Colorado Springs. It kind of centers Pikes Peak, you know, like you would see in a picture frame almost. It's just right there, and it feels very close because of the angle. It's just a really nice place to view the mountain.
It's amazing out here.
Wait until you see Pikes Peak.
My sister Dana lived here, and we came down for a visit. First time I've been in Colorado Springs in my life. We just had a baby about 7 months ago. We thought we'd bring the new fam down and see the sights in Colorado Springs because we'd never been here, so that's what we were doing here. It seemed like a nice day to go do something, so we decided on a drive. Dana suggested Rampart Range Road. There was a couple of overlooks that we could stop at and see Pikes Peak and just sort of kind of get a feel for things, especially in an area we've never been to. And Pikes Peak is, you know, it's pretty spectacular, so it seemed like a good idea at the time.
Dana, come here.
What?
What is that?
I looked over,
Oh my God.
I was like, wow, whoa.
We need to call someone.
In my mind, there wasn't any doubt. As I approached the retaining wall, took in Pikes Peak, and then looked, there was what appeared to be an African-American, hands were behind his back, bound with a belt, and he had a t-shirt bag or a Walmart bag over his head. And he looked a little bit inflated, almost like it was a doll or something, and that's when I turned and said to Dana, hey, come over here. It was a little bit surreal. You know, here you are in a nice mountain setting, and you're supposed to be seeing all things beautiful, and here is this sort of anomaly in the middle of everything that's out of place.
Let's go.
We had a dead body in front of us. It's a memory that's etched in my brain. That's one of those things I'll never forget.
Within the hour, investigators from the El Paso County Sheriff's Office are on the scene.
Dispatch. It's an I-7. Afternoon, Detective Hatch.
Hey, Jeff, you first on scene?
Yes, sir.
Murders occur sometimes very close to the city-county line. This particular case, there was no doubt. It is well outside of the city limits of Colorado Springs. It falls in the jurisdiction of the El Paso County Sheriff's Department.
All right, what are we looking at?
A couple people found a body at the bottom of the embankment over here.
Maybe a hiker took a spill?
I don't think so. You'll see when we get over there. Coroner's here already.
All right, well, let's take a look.
I know Detective Hatch fairly well. He was a good detective. He was dogged. He would stay on something.
Detective Hatch makes his way down the embankment carefully so he can closely examine the remains.
Hey, guys.
Good God.
He's quite disturbed by what he sees.
A black male, a plastic sack taped at the neck. There was a blue blanket partially wrapped around him. His wrists were bound behind him and some sort of strap around his ankles.
Definitely not a fallen hiker. Any idea how long this guy's been down here, Bowerman?
The body's pretty swollen, but I'm not seeing a lot of skin discoloration. Less than 24 hours.
How about what killed him?
No obvious wounds, but we're waiting to see what's under this bag.
It was apparent that this person had been brutally beaten. His face was swollen beyond identification.
Any wallet or other ID lying around?
Negative, no clothes, nothing.
Did you see any footprints when you first came in the area, Jeff?
No, no blood, no prints, no indication of anything.
Now, it's apparent this did not happen at this location. This is a disposal site of human remains.
Okay, well, let's continue to scan the area for evidence. In the meantime, I want to take a look up there.
So detectives started walking up towards the top of the overlook.
Are you seeing anything? Hey, wait a minute. Check that out.
Drag marks.
Yep.
My initial assumption was this is its appearance of a body being dragged and the heels dragging on the ground.
Look familiar?
They noticed little pieces of this blue Afghan blanket that was found wrapped around the body.
Looks like you got your hands full with this one.
Yeah. We're not gonna get anywhere unless we ID this guy.
The first step in any murder case is who got murdered. That gives you a place to begin.
I think I'm gonna need a little help on this one.
Yeah, just keep me in the loop once the guy's booked. Okay, thanks.
In 1996, I had spent 23 years and change on the police department, which equates to 106 years of doing anything else. And I was thinking I was eligible to retire the coming August. My wife had been pestering me at great length about her unhappiness with me still doing what I'm doing. On call, never home, working all the time. She'd had enough, and I knew that. And I was guilty of that because I did know it. But I was really thinking about not continuing past August of that year. I hadn't made the decision, but I was getting close.
It's Kenda.
Hey, Joe, Rich Hatch.
From the sheriff's office, how are you?
Hey, Rich, I'm all right.
So the sheriff's detectives contact me directly and say, are we missing a black male, approximately 20 years old? They do so because we carry most of the missing persons reports in the jurisdiction.
Do you have victim's fingerprints?
Yeah, you think you can have you guys run them for me?
I'll have the lab make a priority.
Thanks, Joe. Appreciate that.
While Kenda does his part to help, Detective Hatch hopes the autopsy will reveal more clues about the victim's cause of death.
Once I got the blood cleaned off of him, I had a better sense of his injuries. The beating was more vicious than I thought.
Under crime scene conditions, with dirt and poor light and all the things that accompany looking at someone in the wild who's been killed and thrown off an embankment, you're unable to see a great deal. But put him in a morgue, remove the bindings, they can see external damage to the body that was not seen at the scene.
The victim had suffered numerous skull fractures and lacerations around the head and the face area. The coroner ruled that these injuries were caused by some type of blunt force object.
Any idea what the instrument was?
No, could be a number of things, but whatever it was about a ½ inch in diameter. It did severe damage.
He was hit with great force and further had a series of subdural hematomas to the brain, which caused his death.
His neck seems to be pretty bruised as well. Any evidence of strangulation?
Oh yeah, the hyoid bone was completely crushed, but the strangulation occurred after death.
Whoever did this is incredibly violent and incredibly dangerous. There's an enormous amount of overkill. There is a rage factor when you beat someone so severely that they die. Your intent is not just to kill them, but to punish them.
With the cause of death confirmed, Detective Hatch checks in on Kenda's progress.
Hey, Joe. Any luck on that missing persons?
Unfortunately not. However, we did get a hit on the print.
We determined that the victim is 21 years of age, and his name is Derek James.
You look him up?
Yeah, check this out.
Wow.
When the victim, Derek, was identified through the database, it also revealed that he had an extensive criminal history.
Criminal trespassing, aggravated theft, breaking and entering, violation of probation, the list goes on.
Looks like you're out of prison pretty recently.
He's only been out of the penitentiary for 60 days, and it wasn't his first hit. This kid's been around the block at age 21.
I'm sure you hung around with a pretty tough crowd.
There's an old expression, if you lay down with dogs, you get fleas. And maybe there's a flea who decides that Derek needs to go away. We are assisting the Sheriff's Department in an investigation of a disposed homicide victim found over an overlook on the Rampart Range Road. We've identified him as Derek James. In our records, we discover someone listed as a foster father whose name is Jimmy Ayers, and he lives in the city of Colorado Springs.
Excuse me, I'm looking for Jimmy Ayers.
Well, you're in luck. You found him. What can I do for you?
Jimmy Ayers is Derek's legal foster parent, and that is a really noble position because you understand that this young person doesn't have anybody else.
I'm Detective Hatch from the Sheriff's Office. Do you know a Derek James?
Yeah, I'm his foster father. What do you do now?
They need somebody to guide them and to mentor them and kind of help them through life because they don't have anybody else to depend on.
Is there someone we can talk?
Yeah.
Mr. Ayers, I'm afraid I have some bad news. I'm sorry to say Derek is dead.
What?
Mr. Ayers is shocked by this information.
We found his body out on Rampart Range Road.
I'll be damned. I really thought that boy was heading down the right path this time.
Jimmy Ayers really thought Derek was turning his life around, and so it was extra sad for him to find out that he had been murdered this way.
Mr. Ayers, how long have you been his foster parent?
Since junior high.
Derek's mother had actually died in prison, and his father was in prison. I think it might be difficult for some people who have had a stable life to really understand what it means to be a young person and have to move from house to house, never knowing who you were going to live with, foster family to foster family. You have no roots. You have no stability in your life where you have people you can really count on. And so you could see where you might turn to a life of crime or get involved in drugs or hang around people that, probably aren't the best people to be hanging around with. And because he really didn't have any parents or family, he finally became a ward of the state in Colorado.
The boy had a tough go at it. In and out of prison. But I really thought he was committed to changing his life this time.
Derek was trying to turn his life around and had enrolled in a program that helped mentor young offenders to try to not make the same mistakes that he did.
When's the last time you saw Derek?
DJ. Everyone calls him DJ.
DJ.
It was a couple of days ago. He came by, I fed him, and we talked about him getting a job. He left the next day, saying he was going to his girlfriend's house.
And I haven't seen him since.
Girlfriend, what's her name?
I really don't know. It's hard to keep up with all the girlfriends he has.
One of the things that Jimmy says about Derek is that he knows how to turn the charm on, always has a girlfriend or two.
Perhaps one of these girlfriends would know what happened to him or whose wrong side did he get on.
Okay. Well, thank you for your time, Mr. Ayers, and I'm very sorry for your loss.
Thank you.
So the next best thing to do is to find out who is the most recent girlfriend of DJ.
But before Detective Hatch can dig any deeper into Derek James's personal life, he's hit with some interesting news.
Detective Hatch,
What's up, Tina?
a girl just dropped by wanting to talk about that murder up on Rampart Range Road.
Really? She's still here?
Yeah, she's waiting for you in the conference room.
Thanks.
This woman says her street name is Bambi and that she knows DJ and she knows who killed him. Well, that's pretty significant.
I understand you may have some information about what happened with Derek James.
Yeah.
Are you his girlfriend?
No, but we've been friends for a long time. And I know the guy he was recently beefing with.
Bambi told investigators that after he got out of prison on this last stint, he had a run-in with an old acquaintance.
His name is Sam Fuller. Everybody call him Trip.
Bambi advised that at one time, Derek and Tripp had been pretty good friends.
And what happened between DJ and Trip?
She says they got into it over the affections of a girl. And that is a very common motive in murder.
Do you know where Trip lives?
Yeah, but you can't tell him I told you anything. I don't want to get killed.
It's okay. You have my word.
With a new lead to pursue, Detective Hatch heads to the home of Sam Fuller, a.k.a. Trip.
Yeah. Mr. Fuller, we're detectives from the sheriff's office. You mind stepping out in the hall? So what exactly do you guys want?
He's perplexed. Why are the police at my house? I've done nothing wrong.
Mr. Fuller, we're here to talk about Derek James.
DJ? I haven't seen that boy in a minute.
Well, that's not what we heard.
What you mean?
Trip, do you know how Derek James ended up dead?
Dead? You saying somebody killed him? What happened?
Tripp was quite surprised at that. The emotion was genuine. You could tell that he really did not know that Derek had been killed.
He says to the sheriff's detectives, I don't know why my name came up in this.
But when you haven't seen somebody for a long time and all of a sudden police are asking you about his murder, you'd be like, wait a minute, how'd they get my name? How are they figuring that I'm involved? Is somebody trying to set me up for this?
So you're saying you and DJ did not have an issue over a girl?
Nah, man, we used to go running together, and chase the same girls or whatever, but I don't hear with those people no more.
He admits they've been in and out of jail together on a number of occasions, but in the recent past, Sam Fuller straightened out his life, and he said, I don't do that anymore.
Okay. You have any kind of alibi for the last few days?
Yeah, I sure do. I've been working. You can call my boss.
Let me check on that. I use the phone in here?
Yeah.
Hey, Trip. Well, you said you haven't seen DJ in a while, but do you know if he had any girlfriends?
Girlfriends? DJ was a dog, man. But last I heard, he was seeing this one girl.
He said, somebody told me that his main squeeze these days is a female named Sheila Barnhart.
Sheila Barnhart. Any idea where she lives?
Nah, man, I never met her before.
All checks out.
So they dismiss Mr. Fuller and assume that Bambi is telling a tale. There is a significant number of people who live in the criminal subculture who see Crime Stoppers as a piggy bank. Let's make a phone call, maybe they'll give us $20. In their minds, the police will pay for information. That is true, to an extent that's true, but only for the best information. That's what leads to arrest and conviction. We don't pay for rumors. We don't pay for your opinion. We pay for something when it works, and not until it works.
Thank you, Mr. Fuller. Appreciate your time.
So their focus now is on Sheila Barnhart. Who is she, and what does she know?
Detective Hatch and his partner waste little time tracking down an address.
Can I help you?
When this woman answers the door, she's wearing rubber cleaning gloves, and she is perspiring.
Excuse me, ma'am. We're looking for Sheila Barnhart.
They get the deer in headlights look from her, and she stammers and says, well...
Sheila, she's not here. I'm her sister, Stephanie.
And they look over her shoulder, and this apartment is filled with cleaning products.
What are you doing in there, Stephanie?
Just cleaning.
Yeah, I can see that. You missed a spot?
Well, my. Blood spatter on the ceiling only gets there one way. Cast off from a blunt instrument. What's been happening in here? Did Derek James happen in here? The Sheriff's Department is investigating the brutal death of Derek James. They're in an apartment that's supposed to contain his most recent girlfriend, Sheila Barnhart, but they find her sister, Stephanie, cleaning up what appears to be a crime scene.
From what the investigators were able to observe just from the front door, that gave them probable cause to ask for a warrant for the search of this house.
Officer, check under that carpet.
When people try to clean up blood stains, a lot of times they'll use bleach. But you pull the carpet up, the blood is still underneath the carpet on the floor.
You come get this. There. Luminol ready yet?
Give me just a second.
Luminol is a chemical that causes human blood to fluoresce. It will even cause invisible to the human eye blood to fluoresce.
All right, Luminol's ready.
Okay, kill the lights, please.
This apartment glows in the dark. This place is covered in blood.
You can see the efforts of where it had tried to be cleaned up, but it was just so much that that wasn't working.
I found this on the couch.
Well, I'll be damned.
CSI had located some pieces of fuzzy blue material which matched the blue Afghan that was found on the victim's body.
You don't have to be Sherlock Holmes to realize that this is where Derek James met his untimely demise. So Stephanie's in this up to her neck.
Okay, Stephanie, it's time for you to tell me what the hell is going on here.
I don't actually know.
And why are you cleaning up a crime scene?
So last night, my sister Sheila called me and she was freaking out, said something had happened to DJ and begged me to come over.
Was DJ here when you arrived?
No, but there was blood all over the couch.
She was shocked at how much blood there was. And she said Sheila looked emotionally distraught to the maximum.
Did Sheila tell you what happened to DJ?
She just said something bad.
Well, something bad did happen to DJ, Stephanie, because DJ happens to be very dead right now.
I didn't ask questions. I didn't want to know.
Where is Sheila now?
I couldn't get her to calm down, so I sent her back to my place. I told her I'd meet her there when I was finished.
Okay, Stephanie, we're gonna have to put you under arrest.
What? No, I didn't do anything. I was just trying to help.
And that makes you an accessory to murder.
No,
Officer?
One of the elements of being an accessory is the attempt to destroy or conceal evidence. And Stephanie is in the process of doing precisely that.
After Stephanie is booked on accessory charges, investigators set their sights on her sister, Sheila.
The sheriff's department goes to Stephanie's apartment, and as advertised, Sheila Barnhart is present. She's placed in custody because Sheila has a few things to explain, not the least of which is a dead guy on her sofa.
Okay, Sheila. This is your chance to come clean about whatever happened at your place the other night.
I don't know what you're talking about.
Okay. Well, let me catch you up to speed. There's mountains of blood evidence all over your home suggesting that you and your sister killed Derek James.
That isn't what happened. I didn't kill DJ.
Okay. Then who did?
I don't know. But I can explain.
Then start explaining, Sheila, because you kind of need to explain.
So the other night, I got this phone call. Hello?
You tell your punk boyfriend to pay me what he owes. He ain't gonna like what happens if I got to come over there and collect it myself.
Who is this? Hello? Hello?
And she's obviously very scared and concerned. Is her life in danger? Are they really going to come over here?
Sheila, don't worry about it. It's nothing.
DJ, this guy sounded serious. I don't think he's messing around.
It's nothing. Trust me.
I just don't want anything to happen to you.
I know, but it's fine. Promise. Now, don't wait for me, all right? We'll be back later.
Okay. I believed him. But later that night, I heard this shouting downstairs. DJ?
Huh?
Look, man, I don't have it just yet, but I will soon.
No, man, we done waiting.
She says she sees a black male and a Hispanic male circling DJ, yelling about the money he owes them.
DJ?
Baby, go back to bed.
You better make yourself disappear.
What if she calls the cops?
We ain't calling no cops. If we do, we'll come back here and kill you too. I ain't playing.
So I went back to my room, and I heard all these loud noises.
Like a fight?
Yeah. I could hear DJ begging them to stop. And then all of a sudden, the front door slammed.
She comes out of her bedroom, goes downstairs, DJ is gone, and there's blood everywhere.
Well, why didn't you call the police?
Because I was afraid. They said they were gonna kill me. I didn't know what to do.
Investigators are a bit skeptical of Sheila's story, but she's coming off as somewhat genuine. So they can't ignore the mention of these two new potential suspects.
Sheila, do you think that you can describe the men that you saw?
I can try.
She's asked to get with one of our lab techs to try to recreate a mugshot of these two people.
Like this? No, the eyebrows were definitely thicker than that.
Years earlier, they would use an artist to do this, but now there are a number of programs, and you literally assemble it on a computer screen.
Yeah, those lips look right.
You have hundreds and hundreds of possibilities, and you just keep trying until you get closer and closer and closer.
So you're positive this is what the guys who killed DJ look like?
I think so.
They have to pursue what she says because she said it. Once the cat's out of the bag, you have an obligation to pursue it.
As the legitimacy of Sheila's lead is tested, the investigation continues to gain traction from an unexpected source.
Miss Kenda.
Lieutenant, there's a woman on the phone here. Sounds like she might have some info on that murder the sheriff's office is working.
Really? Okay, put her through.
Hello?
This is Lieutenant Kenda. Who am I speaking with?
I don't want to tell you my name.
So she gets on the phone. She's very frightened and her voice is shaky.
But I think my neighbor might be involved in that murder up on Rampart Range.
And why is that?
Well, he was packing up his stuff this morning, and he said he needed to leave town because he did something bad.
And what's your neighbor's name?
Brandon Barnhart.
Brandon Barnhart.
And that name hit me right between the eyes.
You know if he's related to Sheila Barnhart?
Yeah. Sheila's his sister.
So Brandon says he's done something bad. Oh, it was more than bad, Brandon. It was brutal. And you made the mistake of doing it in your sister's apartment. The caller provides the address where she last saw him packing his things. We go to that address to pick him up on behalf of the sheriff's department.
Sheriff's Officer of the War, come to the door. Hands. Show us your hands when you step out. Slowly open the door. Step out slowly. Hands. Keep coming. Keep coming. Step all the way to my partner.
You looking for Brandon?
Yeah, is he here?
No, you just missed him.
And you are?
His mother?
So somewhere we can talk?
She says, I've been expecting the police to come by. The family is the people who are in possession of intimate knowledge of the missing person.
What?
Friends don't know what people do. Families know. I have gone to mothers of murder suspects on a number of occasions. There's no stronger bond than motherhood.
Thanks, Sean.
Mothers love their children no matter what they've done. They want to protect them as best they can. And if you present the facts to them in a reasonable way and explain to them that you have no intention of bringing harm to their child, they respond to that. They don't want their child to be hurt.
I don't know what's going on, but Brandon was acting real strange this morning. He seemed like he gotten himself into some trouble.
She said that Brandon shows up and he's all upset and being pretty evasive and keeps telling her he's sorry, and she's wondering, what are you sorry for?
Said he needed to leave town for a while. Didn't say why. Just packed his bag and up and left.
Do you know where he was headed?
If I had to guess, I'd say Reno. We've got family out there.
So she says he probably went to Reno, Nevada, and not to California, because we have family in Reno, Nevada. People, when they run, are filled with fear, they're filled with angst, they really don't know what to do, but they can't go to strangers, so he's got to go to family, somebody who might protect him, give him a place to hide, provide him with money, provide him with clothing, provide him with what he needs to survive long enough to stay out of custody.
What is it you think my son did?
Ma'am, were you aware that your daughter's boyfriend, DJ, was murdered?
And you think Brandon did it?
There's a strong possibility.
God, no. No, that can't be possible. Not my boy.
As a parent, right away you'd be thinking, this is a big mistake. You have the wrong person. My son would never be involved in something like that.
Well, if he calls or tries to contact you at all, can you let me know?
Okay. I'm gonna try to get him on the phone, too.
Okay. Thank you.
Now the sheriff's department is convinced that Sheila lied. Her brother is in flight, and he's not Hispanic, and he's not black. So whatever she said is a lie to prevent the discovery of the truth.
Sheila, we know your brother is somehow involved in this. Now, you need to tell us the truth, because if you don't, there's a very good chance that you will go down for whatever he did.
Okay. Okay, you're right. I didn't tell you the whole story. The truth is, DJ is just like every other boyfriend I've ever had.
She goes on to say she has been a victim of abuse by boyfriends. She thought that DJ would be different.
First, he was good to me. But I became suspicious that he was seeing other girls. And when I confronted him about it the other night, he just lost it.
She said he got upset with her and backhanded her, slapped her across the face. And then he commenced to assault her.
I told myself I was never gonna let any man mistreat me ever again. And I sure as hell wasn't gonna let DJ.
So you called your brother?
Yeah.
Hello? Hello?
Brandon, I need your help.
Why? What's wrong?
She called her brother and told him what had occurred, and he got really upset.
What? Wait, are you serious?
I have an idea of how to get him back.
So the next day, she tells her brother that she's gonna poison him by baking poison muffins. Well, you look in a recipe book, Betty Crocker doesn't have anything about poison muffins, but Sheila has an idea.
I had some sleeping pills and prescription lithium that I crushed up and put into the muffin mix.
Lithium is a very powerful drug used to treat mental illness and is potentially fatal in a large amount.
Hey, babe. It smells amazing in here. Oh, you made muffins, huh?
I wanted to apologize for earlier.
Baby, you need to apologize. It's my fault, too.
She fed him the muffins, and sure enough, he lay down on the couch and went to sleep.
Brandon showed up with his friend Eric.
Eric who?
English. They told me to go upstairs and shut the door.
She could hear a terrible beating going on, and even heard Derek say stop.
She said when all the noise stopped, she came down the stairs and saw blood everywhere.
I didn't know DJ was dead or what. I thought Brandon was just going to beat him up. I swear.
Go ahead and stand on up.
Sheila is a typical criminal trying to distance herself from the event. She apparently, in a few minutes it took to tell the story, forgot that she tried to poison him to death. Now she wants to say she didn't participate in his murder. Excuse me?
Sheila is charged with first-degree murder, and the sheriff's department sets their sights on a newly named co-conspirator.
It's not just her and her brother anymore. It's her brother, and Eric English, whoever the hell he is.
Well, a background check's done on Eric, and it discloses that he has several warrants out for his arrest. So they find out where he's living and go to his residence.
Any eyes on the suspect? Negative. Okay, hold your positions till he comes out. Copy that.
Wait a minute. Is that him?
They see a guy matching Eric English's description pull up.
We have a suspect confirmation. All right, all units prepare to move in. Use extreme caution. Go, 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 go.
You give him no opportunity to draw a weapon, no opportunity to run. You set the tone for the impending conversation.
Hands Eric English! Eric English! Get out of the car!
So the choice is Eric English on how difficult he wants to make this arrest.
Hands up! Out of the car!
If he wants to cooperate and surrender, that's one thing.
Out of the car!
If he wants to resist, that's going to be the last thing he ever did. The Sheriff's Department is investigating the brutal murder of Derek James, and with our assistance have determined that Sheila Barnhart, Brandon Barnhart, and Eric English are the three people involved in this crime. And Eric English has just been spotted by police in his parking lot.
Out of the car!
Eric English is at a point of making a choice. Do you want to risk your life, or do you want to just get arrested?
Get out of the car! Hands up!
As I've often said to people, can you run 1,200 feet per second? Because this bullet can.
Out of the car! Get out of the car! Don't shoot! Put your hands up! Turn around.
What's going on?
Eric English, you're under arrest for the murder of Derek James.
What the hell are you talking about, man?
He's taken to the El Paso County Sheriff's Department for interrogation.
Any of these look familiar?
Yo, I don't want to see that. Damn.
Why not?
I didn't know we was gonna go that far.
That is an incriminating statement.
Who's we?
Me and Brandon.
Well, how'd you get roped into this in the first place?
That night, Brandon called me asking for a ride to his sister's place.
Eric picked him up, and when Brandon got in the car, he said, I want you to help me deal with a guy who hurt my sister.
I said, sure.
What happened when you got out to the house?
The guy was sleeping on the couch, and I thought we were gonna wake him up. All of a sudden, Brandon pulled out a pipe and started knocking the hell out of him.
Eric says Brandon just went off on him and started beating him absolutely out of control. And Eric was shocked. He didn't expect it.
I swear, I didn't even touch the guy.
Well, how'd you get DJ's body out to Rampart Range Road?
I don't know. Brandon figured all that out.
Oh, well, then I guess you won't mind if we take a look in your trunk?
Yeah, I want a lawyer.
Well, you're kind of too late for that, Eric. You've already buried yourself in the middle of a murder.
Well, all right then. Good luck, Eric. You're gonna need it.
Eric is now in custody, so is Sheila, but we are still missing Brandon Barnhart. We need to find him.
Luckily for the investigation, they don't need to look too far.
All right, I'll let him know. Can I help you?
Yeah, I'm Brandon Barnhart. I'm here to turn myself in.
Really? Well, fine, we'll do that. We accept all business 24 hours a day. Now we have all the players in the hands of the Sheriff's Department.
Mr. Barnhart, I'm Detective Hatch. I understand you're ready to tell us what happened to Derek James.
I didn't mean to kill him, man.
All right. Relax, Brandon.
Brandon is emotionally distraught. He's a perfect candidate for an interrogation.
Relax for a moment. Just tell us what happened with DJ.
I knew right from the beginning that it wasn't gonna work between him and Sheila.
What do you mean?
I've known that dude a long time.
Brandon explains that he, too, was in foster care at points in his life, just like DJ. They both wound up in group homes together, and they became friends.
And through the years, we kind of just drifted off. Stopped talking to each other as much. Kept getting in trouble, going to prison. And one day I found out he's dating my sister.
How'd you feel about that?
How do you think I felt?
He wasn't very happy about that, because he knew who DJ was. Brandon even had a conversation with DJ.
I know we go way back and all, man, but I don't know about you dating my sister.
You tripping, Brand?
No, I'm not. Now promise me you're gonna treat her right.
All right, man. I promise.
So when his sister called him crying, saying that DJ beat her up, Brandon flipped a switch. He went into a blind rage.
Eric, get your ass over here now!
And all he wanted to do was get even.
So we made a plan, and I had Eric come pick me up.
Did you have some sort of weapon with you?
Yeah. Let's go.
Rebar is solid steel used in the construction of concrete, so it is, without question, a deadly weapon.
When we got there, I knew that Sheila had slipped DJ some pills.
Where's he at?
He's on the couch in the living room.
Yo, DJ!
He hit him as hard and as often as he could. Eric is also participating in the attack.
I think he wants more, Brandon. Kick his ass.
Come on.
And it sounds like Sheila was there, egging him on.
Sheila, get the rope.
Brandon said that Sheila got kind of a black web belt and tied it around his legs to keep him from squirming around. They then taped his hands together.
At some point, Brandon admits to putting the rebar under his chin and he hears something snap.
They then wrapped him in a blue blanket, drug him out to Eric's car, and then they drove him up Rampart Range Road. Get it off the hook. They then drug him from the trunk of Eric's car over to the side of the overlook. What a brutal way to end somebody's life.
It's a savage killing by people who are unconcerned about what they're doing because they're angry. And in their mind, that makes it okay. DJ has transgressed, and they're going to punish him.
Brandon Barnhart's disturbing confession implicates not only himself, but also his sister Sheila and his friend, Eric English. All three are charged with first-degree murder for their roles in the crime.
Eric, Brandon, and Sheila all pled guilty to a reduced charge of second-degree murder, and they were sentenced to 48 years. Stephanie received 4 years probation.
I've never been surprised by what people will do, but I've often been disappointed. Here you have a situation where nobody's smart enough to consider protection orders or going over and removing his sister from the presence of this individual. Nobody thinks about that. They think about rage. You hurt my sister, I'm gonna hurt you. Derek James didn't understand who he was dealing with, and he found that out at the end of a 20-inch piece of rebar.
Paris, winter of 1994. The kind of cold that settles into stone and bone alike. The kind that makes the city quieter than ever admits to be, when footsteps echo too loudly in narrow streets, and every shadow feels a second too long, and somewhere behind a row of shuttered cafes, behind iron balconies slick with frost, a woman disappears without a scream, without a struggle loud enough for anyone to remember, only the sudden absence of a life that should have kept moving forward, only the silence that follows when something is gone, and no one yet realizes how permanent that silence will become. Her name would later be printed in block letters, then slowly fade into smaller type, then into footnotes, then into nothing at all. But that night she was just another Parisian figure slipping into the dark, a coat pulled tight, breath visible in the air, keys in her hand, routine guiding her steps like it always had, the illusion of safety stitched into the rhythm of a familiar street. And when she failed to arrive home, when the hours passed and the phone stayed quiet, the city did what? Cities always do. It moved on, even as a family began counting minutes, then hours, then days. By morning, the police would call it a disappearance. Not yet a crime, not yet a cold case, just a woman missing in a city of millions. But the apartment told a story that felt wrong from the start. A handbag neatly placed by the door untouched, no signs of forced entry, no note, no explanation, just a space where a person should have been. And neighbors would later insist they heard nothing, saw nothing, noticed nothing unusual, because nothing unusual ever announces itself when it arrives. The neighborhood was the kind journalists love to describe as quiet. Tree-lined streets, modest buildings, residents who nodded at each other but rarely spoke. A place where crimes were things that happened elsewhere. And when detectives canvassed door to door, notebooks in hand, the answers blurred together into a fog of polite shrugs and half-memories. A man walking a dog, a car parked too long, footsteps that could belong to anyone, and already, invisibly, the case was slipping away. In the first days, the investigation moved fast. Officers were tracing her last known route, tracing phone records, questioning colleagues, former lovers, acquaintances who suddenly felt the heat of attention they never expected. And yet every lead seemed to dissolve under scrutiny. Alibis checked out. Timelines failed to overlap. Rumors collapsed into nothing. And the city that had swallowed her refused to give anything back. The press caught on quickly. Headlines tightened the story into sharp, sensational phrases. Mysterious disappearance. Vanished without trace. The words selling fear and fascination in equal measure. But behind the ink and photographs, the detectives felt already. The creeping sense that something essential had been missed. Some moment that went unrecorded. Some witness who didn't realize they were a witness at all. Days turned into weeks. Weeks into months. And with every passing report filed, the language shifted, hope thinning out between the lines, until the word cold hovered just out of sight, waiting for the moment it would finally be spoken aloud. And when the case was officially classified as a cold case, it landed like a verdict, a quiet admission that the trail had gone dark. Her family never accepted that word, never learned how to live with it, because cold cases are not cold with people left behind. They burn, slow and constant, and every unanswered question becomes its own kind of wound, reopened with every anniversary, every rumor, every false sighting that flickered and died. Years passed, Paris changed. Storefronts closed and reopened under new names. Faces aged, memories softened. And the file bearing her name gathered dust in an archive where hundreds of other unsolved lives slept in cardboard boxes, reduced to paper and photographs and evidence tags that no longer led anywhere. And yet somewhere in the city, someone remembered more than they ever admitted. Someone carried a secret heavy enough to shape an entire life around it. The investigators who first worked the case moved on or retired, their notes becoming artifacts for younger detectives who occasionally pulled a file, flipped through it, felt the familiar frustration, and put it back, because it was never enough to reopen it, never enough to justify chasing ghosts through streets that had long forgotten her name. And then, years later, long after most people had stopped listening, long after the story had slipped from public consciousness, a letter arrived. No return address. No name, just a thin envelope, postmarked Paris, delivered to a precinct that had nearly forgotten the case existed, and inside, a handful of pages, typed, precise, unemotional, laying out details that had never been made public. Details only someone close to the truth could know, details that snapped the past back into focus like a sudden flash of light in a dark room. The letter didn't claim innocence. It didn't beg forgiveness. It didn't even ask to be believed. It simply told a story, calmly, methodically, as if recounting something that had happened to someone else. And with every paragraph, the temperature in that evidence room seemed to drop, because the words on the page breathed life into a crime that had never officially been confirmed, only suspected. Detectives read it in silence, then read it again, cross-checking facts, dates, locations, their pens hovering over the paper as the realization settled in that this was no prank, no hoax from a bored mind, but something far more dangerous, a voice reaching out from the past, tearing open a wound the city thought it scarred over. Yet even as the letter promised answers, it delivered something far more unsettling, because for every truth it revealed, it left another question hanging. For every confession it hinted at, it stopped just short of clarity, as if the writer understood exactly how much to give and exactly how much to withhold, how to shock without resolving, how to confess without fully surrendering. And in that space, between revelation and denial, the cold case breathed again, dragging Paris back to 1994, back to a winter night where a woman walked into the dark and never came back to silence that had lasted decades, and back to the terrifying possibility that the truth had been hiding in plain sight all along. The letter was photocopied, cataloged, sealed in plastic, but the damage it did could not be contained, because once words like those are read, Once details long buried resurface with precision and intent, the past stops being past. It presses in, demanding to be acknowledged. And in a quiet room of the prefecture, detectives leaned over a table and felt the unmistakable pull of something waking up. It began with places, exact addresses, stairwells, corners of streets that had never appeared in any public report, a chipped tile in an entryway, the smell of damp stone near a service door, the sound of metro train passing beneath a particular block at a particular hour. Details so ordinary they would have meant nothing to anyone else, yet so specific they locked into the old case file like missing pieces snapping into place. And with every line the investigators felt a sensation they had, almost forgotten, the sensation of being close. The writer described a night without emotion, without drama, as if narrating a routine task. And that was what unsettled them most, because crimes of passion leave fingerprint of chaos, but this voice was controlled, deliberate, structured, a mind that had replayed the same sequence for years, refining it, polishing it, waiting for the moment it could finally speak without being interrupted. They cross-checked the letter against the original reports, against witness statements that had once seemed too vague to matter, and now, suddenly, those fragments began to glow with relevance. A neighbor who had mentioned a car idling longer than necessary, a concierge who remembered footsteps on the stairs after midnight, a shop owner who recalled a man lingering outside long after closing, all dismissed at the time, all resurrected by a few typed pages arriving decades too late. The handwriting analysis unit confirmed the typing style suggested an older machine or a deliberate attempt to mimic one, a choice that spoke to intention, to a writer who wanted distance from the modern world, who wanted the message to feel as if it belonged to another era, another time, and in doing so, made it impossible to ignore. The letter ended abruptly. No signature, no plea, just a final sentence that hung in the air like a challenge, a statement implying knowledge of where the truth had been hidden. And when detectives reached that line, they didn't speak. Because silence was safer than saying out loud what they were all thinking, that this might finally be the crack that shattered decades of nothing. Within hours, the cold case unit was reassembled, names pulled from retirement lists, files retrieved from storage, evidence bags reopened under fluorescent light. And with each item handled again, the room filled with ghosts, the weight of all the years this case had been allowed to sleep, the awareness that time had erased more than it had preserved. The victim's family was notified cautiously, words chosen with care, because hope is a fragile thing when it has been broken before, and the reaction was not relief but suspicion, the kind learned over years of false alarms and dead ends, yet beneath it, a tremor, the smallest flicker of belief that maybe, just maybe, this time would be different. Journalists soon caught wind of the renewed activity, whispers spreading through newsrooms like electricity. And though the letter itself remained sealed, the phrase anonymous confession began appearing in headlines, resurrecting the case for a public that barely remembered it, transforming an old disappearance into something sharper, darker, and infinitely more compelling. As attention returned, so did the pressure, because reopening a cold case is not just about finding answers. It is about facing every mistake, every assumption, every moment when something could have been done differently. And the detectives assigned now had to live with the knowledge that if the truth had indeed been hiding in plain sight, it had been overlooked by people just like them. They started with the geography, mapping every location mentioned in the letter, walking the routes again, noting sight lines, distances, places where someone could watch without being seen. And in doing so, they began to understand the city as a writer had understood it, not as a backdrop, but as a tool. Surveillance footage from the era was non-existent or long erased. Phone records incomplete, but human memory, flawed as it is, became their primary resource, and they returned to witnesses who had aged decades, knocking on doors that opened slowly, greeted by faces lined with time. People had moved on yet never truly forgotten that winter night. Some remembered nothing new. Others remembered too much all at once, memories reshaped by years of imagination and regret. But a few, just a few, hesitated before answering, their eyes drifting away, their voices dropping, as if something they'd never said aloud was finally pushing its way out. One man recalled a conversation he had dismissed as irrelevant, a remark about knowing her schedule too well, about routines being predictable, safe, until they aren't, and as he spoke, detectives felt the shape of the letter's voice hovering nearby, the same detached awareness, the same familiarity with habits and timing. Another witness spoke of a figure who didn't belong, someone who blended in too perfectly, who nodded, smiled, exchanged pleasantries, and disappeared into the background. The kind of presence you only recognize as strange in hindsight once you understand what you were actually looking at. With every interview, the pool of potential suspects narrowed, not through dramatic revelations, but through subtle alignment, overlaps between the letter's details and the lived memories of people who had been there, and slowly, a profile began to emerge. Someone not driven by impulse, but by patience. Someone who had watched, waited, learned. The forensic team revisited physical evidence. Items once considered insignificant, fibers, traces, minute anomalies, and though degradation had claimed much, technology had advanced, allowing questions to be asked that were impossible in 1994, and while answers remained elusive, the process itself injected new urgency into the investigation. Yet the letter remained the axis around which everything turned, because it wasn't just a confession, it was a narrative carefully curated, controlling the flow of information, and detectives understood that whoever wrote it had not lost control. They were exercising it, deciding when and how the truth would surface. That realization reframed everything, transforming the writer from a distant voice into an active presence, someone potentially watching the renewed investigation unfold, reading the same headlines, listening to the same rumors, and choosing whether or not to speak again. The question became not only who had written the letter, but why now? Why after decades of silence? Why risk exposure when anonymity had kept them safe for so long? And the answers to those questions hinted at something deeper than guilt, something closer to compulsion. As the case accelerated, tension spread through the department. Late nights became routine, conversations lowered in volume, and an unspoken understanding settled in that they were no longer chasing a disappearance. They were circling a truth that did not want to be found, a truth that survived time precisely because it knew how to hide. And somewhere in Paris, in an apartment filled with ordinary objects and ordinary sounds, the person who had typed that letter lived within reach of the past they had finally disturbed, carrying the knowledge that words once released cannot be retrieved, that confessions, even anonymous ones, leave echoes, and that the city has a way of remembering what it pretends to forget. The cold case was no longer cold, but it was far from solved, suspended in that dangerous space where momentum builds faster than certainty, where every step forward sharpens the fear that the next revelation will be the one that cannot be undone. And as detectives closed their files late one night, the silence of the room felt heavier than it had in years, because this time, the darkness was looking back. The first mistake was assuming the letter had been written in a moment of weakness, a crack in resolve finally giving way after years of silence, because as the investigation deepened, it became clear that nothing about it was impulsive, every line measured, every omission intentional, and the timing itself began to look less like chance and more like design. Detectives traced the postmark, not for location, but for pattern, examining delivery routes, collection times, the quiet choreography of mail moving through Paris at night. And while the system offered no name, it offered something else, a window of opportunity, a narrow slice of time when the letter had to be dropped, a moment when the writer had stepped out of anonymity and into risk. That window became a focal point, cross-reference against work schedules, transit logs, even weather reports, not because rain or cold would identify a suspect, but because they shape behavior, influence decisions. And when you are searching for someone who plans, those influences matter. Attention turned to those who have been close enough to know routines, close enough to disappear into background without raising suspicion. And the original suspect list, once broad and unfocused, tightened, names resurfacing with new weight, people who had been cleared not because they were innocent, but because there had never been enough to hold them. One name in particular kept reappearing, not loudly, not dramatically, but persistently, threaded to the case file like a watermark, a man who lived nearby, whose path intersected with hers just often enough to be forgettable, a presence too ordinary to stand out and yet, in retrospect, too consistent to ignore. He had been interviewed in 1994, cooperative, calm, his answers brief but sufficient, his alibi unremarkable, his demeanor exactly what investigators expected from someone with nothing to hide, and for years that assessment stood unchallenged until the letter's details began to cast his past words in a different light. When detectives reread his statement, they noticed what hadn't mattered before: the phrasing, the casual familiarity with places he claimed to barely know, the way he spoke of her schedule with the certainty of someone who had observed it rather than been told. and suddenly the file felt less like history and more like confession waiting to be translated. Surveillance began quietly, legally constrained but thorough, a delicate balance between observation and provocation, because the goal was not to scare, not yet, but to watch, to see if the revival of the case would produce a reaction, a change in routine, a flicker of unease. And there was one, not dramatic, not incriminating on its own, but subtle, a man who began taking different routes, avoiding certain streets, lingering longer than necessary in places with no significance except one, proximity to the past, and for trained eyes, those deviations spoke volumes. The forensic linguist compared the letter's syntax, its rhythm, its emotional detachment, with archived writing samples taken from various suspects over the years, old reports, handwritten notes, employment records, anything that captured a voice on paper, and while the analysis could not name a writer with certainty, it narrowed the field, excluding many and circling back, again and again, to the same individual. Meanwhile, the media pressure intensified, headlines sharpening, speculation growing wilder by the day, and with every article published, detectives worried that the anonymous writer would retreat, that the fragile thread connecting them to the truth would snap under the weight of exposure. To counter that risk, they leaked nothing, kept their progress tightly contained. But secrecy has a way of attracting its own attention, and rumors spread through corridors, through cafes, through the kind of informal networks that exist only in cities where everyone knows someone who knows someone else. Then came the second letter, shorter than the first, more direct, less controlled. It arrived without warning, delivered to the same precinct, its envelope bearing no return address, its content stripped of narrative and heavy with implication, and as detectives read it, they felt a shift, a subtle change in tone that suggested impatience, perhaps even fear. The writer referenced a renewed investigation obliquely, mocking its slowness, hinting at details yet unrevealed, and in doing so, confirmed what the team had suspected, that the author was watching, reading, tracking their every move, engaged in a silent conversation that only they seemed to realize was happening. One line in particular stood out, a sentence that described a physical action with uncanny accuracy, an action never documented, never shared beyond the initial response team in 1994. And as that realization settled in, the room went quiet, because coincidence had just crossed into certainty. The decision to escalate was made that night. Legal approvals were sought, warrants drafted, strategies debated, because moving too fast risked spooking the suspect, but moving too slowly risked losing initiative entirely, and in the balance between caution and momentum, the letter tipped the scales. The suspect was called in for a voluntary interview. He arrived on time, dressed neatly, his expression open, curious rather than defensive, and as he sat across from detectives who were now decades older than the men who had first questioned him, he appeared unchanged by time, a familiar face framed by new tension. The conversation began innocently, a review of old facts, a chance to clarify, to refresh memories, and he answered easily, too easily, slipping back in the role he had played before, cooperative, composed, almost helpful. But as the questions edged closer to the letter, closer to the night itself, something shifted. His posture stiffened, his sentences shortened, his gaze lingered just a second too long before responding. It wasn't a confession. It wasn't even an admission. It was hesitation. And in cases like this, hesitation is everything, because it reveals the presence of something to hide, a mental obstacle that appears only when the path ahead leads somewhere dangerous. When the interview ended, he left without protest, without accusation, but detectives watched him go with certainty they had not felt before, the certainty that the anonymous voice now had a face, that the cold case had a gravity pulling it toward a single point. Outside, Paris moved as it always had, unaware of the tension threading through its streets, unaware that an old crime was tightening its grip, that decades of silence were compressing into days, and that the man who had walked freely through the city for years was now being followed not just by police, but by the past itself. The letters had changed the rules, transformed anonymity into a liability. And as night fell, detectives prepared for what came next, knowing that the closer they drew, the more likely it became that the truth would either surface in full or retreat forever into the shadows. By the time the third week began, the case had stopped feeling like a resurrection and started to feel like a siege, slow, methodical, exhausting, Because when a suspect knows they're being watched but cannot prove it, every ordinary action becomes deliberate, every movement calculated, and the city itself turns into a board where each step might be the wrong one. Detectives track patterns rather than moments, days rather than hours, mapping the suspect's life as it unfolded in real time, work, errands, cafes, the mundane rituals that form a shield of normality. And yet beneath that surface, the tension was visible in the smallest things, a tightened grip on a coffee cup, a glance of a shoulder that lingered longer than necessary, pauses before answering casual questions from strangers who were not, in fact, strangers at all. The forensic team returned to the second letter, dissecting it line by line, not for what it said, but for what it revealed unintentionally. Shifts in pronouns, subtle emotional leakage, the way the writer referred to the victim not as a person but as a moment, an event frozen in time, a linguistic distancing that suggested familiarity without empathy. That detachment echoed in the suspect interview transcript, the same flattening of emotion, the same absence of shock or curiosity when discussing the disappearance, and when those parallels were laid side by side, the resemblance became difficult to dismiss. A decision was made to test the pressure. A carefully worded press briefing was released, vague enough to protect the investigation, specific enough to signal progress, and as the headline spread, detectives watched the suspect closely, waiting for the story to land, waiting to see how a man who had lived with a secret for decades would respond to suggestion that it might finally be exposed. The response was immediate, though invisible to most. His routine fractured. He canceled appointments, skipped familiar routes, began spending longer hours alone inside his apartment, curtains drawn even during the day. And for investigators, those changes were louder than any protest, because innocent people do not feel the need to hide from a truth they believe cannot touch them. That same evening, a third letter was delivered. This one was handwritten. The handwriting was tight, controlled, almost architectural, each letter constructed with care, as the act of writing itself required concentration, and the content was different, less narrative, more defensive, pushing back against unnamed accusations, insisting on misunderstanding, framing the past as something that could be interpreted in many ways. Yet embedded within the denial was an admission disguised as context, a sentence describing proximity, opportunity, knowledge, and when read carefully, it crossed a line, placing the writer at the center of events rather than on their periphery. The detectives didn't celebrate. They felt the weight of escalation. Because handwritten letters remove distance, they expose rhythm, pressure, hesitation, and when forensic analysts compared the script to old documents, the convergence tightened further, the same slant, the same spacing, the same unconscious habits that survived decades. Still, nothing was definitive enough to act on. Not yet. So they turned to the one thing time had not erased completely, the victim's final hours. Her last confirmed sighting was re-examined, not as an isolated moment, but as part of a chain, a sequence of movements that led her from light into shadow, and when detectives walked that route again, late at night, replicating the timing, the environment revealed something new. There was a blind spot, a stretch of sidewalk where streetlights failed to overlap, where sound dissolved into the hum of distant traffic, where a person could stop another without being seen or heard clearly, and once identified, that space explained too much, why no one heard a scream, why no struggle was reported, why the disappearance felt like an erasure rather than an event. The suspect lived close enough to know that blind spot intimately, close enough to have noticed it years before. When confronted with that fact in a follow-up interview, he dismissed it easily, almost too easily, brushing aside as coincidence. But as he spoke, a bead of sweat traced a path down his temple and his hands, folded neatly on the table, clenched and unclenched in a rhythm he did not seem aware of. The detective shifted tactics, no longer asking direct questions, but allowing silence to do the work, long pauses that forced him to fill the space, and in those moments, fragments surfaced half-finished thoughts, corrections mid-sentence, linguistic backtracking that betrayed a mind working to keep two versions of reality from colliding. Outside the interview room, legal counsel debated the threshold for arrest, the fine line between suspicion and proof, because cases built on circumstantial convergence can collapse if pushed too early, and the shadow of a public failure loomed large, a reminder of what happens when cold cases are reopened without enough to hold them together. As days passed, The pressure mounted not just on the suspect, but on the team, exhaustion seeping into decisions, tempers fraying, because time was once again becoming an adversary, and there was a growing fear that the anonymous writer, now cornered, might choose silence over confession. Then, without warning, the letter stopped. No fourth envelope. No response. Just absence. And absence, in an investigation like this, is not neutral. It is active. It is a choice. And detectives understood that the quiet meant something was happening beyond their view, a recalculation, a retreat, or perhaps a final preparation. Surveillance tightened, every movement documented, every deviation noted, and late one night, as the suspect exited his building and headed not toward his usual destinations but toward the river, the team felt a shift in the air, the sense that the next hours would matter more than the years that had come before. Paris reflected in dark water, lights trembling on the surface, secrets heavy beneath it, and as the suspect stopped along the embankment, standing still for a long moment, detectives held their breath, because the past had finally caught up, and whatever happened next would either break the case open or seal it shut forever. The river did not give anything away that night. It never does. It carries reflections, not answers, and as the suspect stood at the edge, hands resting on the cold stone, staring down at water that had seen more secrets than any archive, the surveillance team waited, muscles tight, minds racing to contingencies they hoped would remain theoretical. He didn't jump. He didn't throw anything. He simply stood there motionless, long enough for the moment to become unsettling, long enough for detectives to wonder whether this was grief, fear, or calculation playing itself out in silence. And when he finally turned away and walked back into the city, the tension didn't ease, it sharpened, because hesitation, again, had spoken louder than action. That night, the call was made. Enough was enough. The next morning, he was brought in under pretext, another clarification, another routine conversation. And this time the room felt different, heavier, stripped of politeness, the kind of atmosphere that tells a person, without saying it outright, that the margins have closed. The detectives didn't begin with the letters. They began with time. They laid out the calendar of 1994, date by date, hour by hour, reconstructing her final day in granular detail. And as they spoke, they watched his face, not for shock, but for recognition, the unconscious signals that appear when memory collides with rehearsed narrative. At first, he nodded along, following the timeline easily, too easily, as he had walked it many times before. But then they reached a specific interval, a window of 20 minutes that had always been blank, unaccounted for, and as that silence settled in the room, his breathing changed. One detective slid a photograph across the table, not of the victim, not of evidence, but a blind spot, the dark stretch of sidewalk, captured recently under the same conditions, the same angle of light, and the effect was immediate, his gaze fixed, his jaw tightening, his fingers twitching before he caught himself. They didn't accuse. They waited. Silence stretched, thick and oppressive, seconds turning into something else entirely, and finally he spoke, not to deny, but to explain, a dangerous shift, because explanations imply involvement. He said he knew the area well. He said everyone who lived nearby did. He said it meant nothing. The detectives let him talk, let the words pile up, because people who lie often do so by adding layers, burying the truth under excess detail. And as he spoke, contradictions emerged, small ones, but precise, a wrong time here, an incorrect sequence there, the kind of errors that appear when someone is recalling something lived rather than something learned. Then they introduced the letters. Not all at once, just the first line of the first one. His reaction was almost imperceptible. A blink held half a second too long, a swallow that came late, and for trained eyes, it was confirmation enough that the voice on those pages was not unfamiliar to him. They read more. Not everything. Just enough. And as the words filled the room, the composure he had maintained for years began to fracture, not explosively, but internally, like ice cracking under pressure, his answers slowing, his confidence thinning, his posture collapsing inward. He asked who else had seen them. He asked what the public knew. Questions he shouldn't have needed to ask. The detectives answered carefully, truth wrapped in ambiguity, and in doing so, they offered him something without naming it, a way out, the possibility of control, because for someone like him, confession is not about guilt. It is about authorship. He asked for a break. Left alone in the room, cameras watching, microphones recording, he stared at the table, at his own hands, rubbing them together as if trying to erase something invisible, and in that isolation, decades of silence pressed in from all sides. When he returned, he didn't confess. He reframed. He spoke of obsession, of proximity mistaken for intimacy, of moments misinterpreted, of a night that went wrong without ever quite saying how. And the detectives listened, knowing this was a threshold, the place where stories pivot from defense to admission. They challenged him gently, pointing out inconsistencies, reminding him of the letters, the details only someone present could know, and slowly, painfully, the narrative shifted again, his language changing from distance to involvement, from she to we, from observation to action. The confession did not arrive as a single statement. It leaked, sentence by sentence. He admitted to following her, to watching her routines, to knowing when she would be alone, and then, finally, to the encounter, the moment when words were exchanged, voices raised just enough to matter, when control slipped and panic took over. What he did not provide was closure. He spoke around the outcome, avoided the finality, leaving the most important question unanswered, and when detectives pressed him, the room filled with a tension that felt almost physical, because this was a line he had protected for decades. Outside, legal teams prepared. Inside, time slowed. And as he sat there, cornered by his own words, the reality settled that the anonymous letters had not been a cry for forgiveness or absolution, but a rehearsal, a way to ease himself toward this moment, to test how much he could say without collapsing entirely. When the interview ended, he was not arrested. Yet, but as he was escorted out, the detectives exchanged looks that said everything, because the cold case was no longer a mystery of what happened, but a question of proof, of whether the truth, once finally spoken, would be enough to withstand the light it had avoided for so long. And somewhere between the river and that interview room, Paris held its breath, because the silence that had protected a secret for decades was beginning to break, and once broken, it could never be restored. The hours after the interview stretched thin, taut with anticipation, because nothing had exploded, nothing had collapsed, and that kind of quiet is the most dangerous of all, the kind that convinces people they still have time when, in fact, time has already turned against them. The suspect went home. That alone unsettled the team. Confessions that leak instead of erupt leave everyone suspended, prosecutors cautious, detectives restless, because the law does not move on intuition, and intuition was all they had in abundance, stacked high with patterns, parallels, admissions that hovered just below the threshold of certainty. So they did what cold cases always demand in their final hours. They went back to the body that never was. Because no matter how compelling a narrative becomes, without physical confirmation, the case remains vulnerable, and the absence of remains had always been a void around which everything else orbited, the unanswered question that allowed doubt to survive. The suspect had avoided that subject carefully. Too carefully. Every time detectives circled back to what happened after the encounter, his language dissolved into abstraction. Phrases like, "I don't remember, it happened fast," "things out of hand." And in those evasions, the team sensed direction, not confusion. They reviewed the maps again, this time not of streets, but of water, drainage, construction records from the mid-1990s, infrastructure projects that had altered the city's underbelly, tunnels sealed, embankments reinforced, access points that no longer existed, and slowly, a new geography emerged, one hidden beneath the familiar. A construction permit from 1995 caught someone's eye. A brief mention of dredging near a section of the river not far from where the suspect had paused days earlier. Work done quickly, quietly, justified by routine maintenance. And though nothing in the record suggested discovery, the timing gnawed at them, because coincidence, in cases like this, rarely stays coincidence for long. They requested archival reports. Nothing noted. No anomalies recorded. But absence again spoke louder than presence, because in the chaos of urban maintenance, things are missed, overlooked, classified as debris, and move along without ceremony. The decision to search was not easy. Years had passed. Water had moved. The city had rebuilt itself atop, whatever lay beneath. But when a cold case reaches this stage, logic gives way to necessity, and necessity demands action even when success feels unlikely. A limited search was authorized, discreet, targeted. No press, no spectacle, just a small team working early mornings and late nights along a stretch of river that had long since forgotten why it mattered. Divers entered water that carried the weight of decades, visibility poor, currents unpredictable, and above them, detectives watched monitors, breath held, knowing that even if something was found, it might not be enough, might not survive scrutiny, might reopen wounds without sealing them. The first days yielded nothing. Silt, debris, fragments that belonged to no one. Hope thinned again, exhaustion pressing in, and yet, on the fourth morning, a signal interrupted the monotony, a density ship beneath layers of sediment, something unnatural in shape, resistant to time. The recovery was slow, deliberate, handled with reverence rather than urgency, because by then, everyone understood the gravity of what might surface, and when the object finally emerged, wrapped in decades of river memory, it did not look like closure. It looked like evidence. Bones. Not complete. Not arranged. But undeniably human. The city did not notice. It went on with its routines, commuters crossing bridges above a truth that had waited far too long to be disturbed. And as forensic teams secured the site, the case crossed an invisible line, moving from inference into reality. The suspect was brought back in. This time, there was no pretext. No gentle framing. Just the facts laid out one by one. The search, the location, the remains. And as the words landed, something in him finally broke, not theatrically, not with tears or shouting, but with collapse, shoulders folding inward, eyes losing focus. The posture of a man who had reached the end of his ability to pretend. He asked what they had found. They answered carefully. He nodded, once, and then he spoke. Not defensively, not evasively, but with a clarity that had been absent until now. He described the aftermath. Not in detail, not yet, but enough to confirm what everyone already knew, that she had not walked away, that the disappearance had ended the same night it began, that the silence had been intentional. The confession still wasn't complete. It circled. It stalled at the edge of finality. But legally, it was enough to move forward, enough to justify restraint, enough to prevent him from returning to the life that had sheltered him for so long. When the handcuffs closed, quietly, without ceremony, the room exhaled. Not relief, something heavier. Because solving a cold case does not feel like victory. It feels like intrusion, like stepping into a space that was sealed for a reason, and now that seal was broken. Outside, the news broke. Headlines exploded. Paris cold case reopened. Anonymous letters lead to arrest. Decades-old disappearance no longer a mystery. The public reacted with shock, fascination, anger, a collective reckoning with the idea that a familiar face could carry such a secret unnoticed for years. The family was informed last, always last, and when they heard, the words landed unevenly, relief tangled with grief, because answers do not undo loss, they only change its shape, and for them, the past would always remain unfinished. As night fell, the suspect sat alone in a cell, stripped of routine, stripped of anonymity, and for the first time since 1994, he had nothing left to hide behind, no letters to write, no narrative to control. The cold case had moved, irrevocably, toward its end, but endings like truths rarely arrive clean. The arrest did not bring silence, it shattered it, because once a cold case breaks open, it releases years of pressure all at once, and Paris, a city accustomed to secrets, found itself forced to look directly at one it had ignored for too long. Inside the precinct, the atmosphere shifted from pursuit to preservation. Every word spoken measured now against what it might mean in court, every step documented, every decision scrutinized, because the story had crossed into a new phase, one where truth must survive procedure or be lost again, this time permanently. The suspect requested counsel. Of course he did. And with that request, the tone changed. Interviews became formal, questions sharper, answers shorter. The free-flowing admissions of the previous day tightened into guarded statements, the kind shaped by legal strategy rather than memory, and detectives understood that whatever truth remained would not be volunteered easily, so they turned to corroboration. The remains recovered from the river were transferred to forensic labs, where time itself became the primary obstacle, decades of water exposure erasing markers, softening edges, blurring certainty. Yet even degraded evidence carries stories, if you know how to listen. DNA extraction began cautiously, a process measured in patience rather than speed, because contamination, even microscopic, could unravel everything. And as technicians worked, detectives returned to the suspect's partial confession, parsing it for points of contact with physical reality. He had mentioned a struggle, not explicitly, but enough to suggest location, enough to imply movement, enough to align with the blind spot, the river access, the timing of dredging. Each element alone meant little. Together, they formed a lattice of probability. The media did what media always does, filling gaps with speculation, turning nuance into narrative, and soon the story evolved beyond the facts, painting the suspect as a monster or a mastermind depending on the headline, and detectives worried less about public opinion than about contamination of the process, witnesses influenced by coverage, memories reshaped by repetition. So they moved fast. Old acquaintances were interviewed again, this time not as potential suspects, but as contextual witnesses, people who had known him then and now, who could speak to changes in behavior, to patterns that once seemed harmless. Some spoke reluctantly, others eagerly, and a few, after years of silence, admitted unease they had never voiced, moments when something felt wrong but not wrong enough to act on, a look held too long, a question asked one too many times. These testimonies did not accuse. They contextualized. They built a psychological map of a man who had existed comfortably within boundaries he himself defined, a man who understood rules well enough to bend them without breaking them, until one night, something snapped. The suspect remained largely silent. In his cell, stripped of routine, he ate little, slept less, and when his lawyer visited, conversations were brief, focused on strategy, not confession, because by now, the narrative was no longer his control. It belonged to the evidence. Then the forensic report arrived. Preliminary, incomplete, but decisive. The remains were human, female, age consistent. And while definitive identification would require more time, more analysis, the probability tilted heavily in one direction, and that tilt changed everything. Prosecutors authorized expanded searches, not just the river, storage units, old vehicles, properties once connected to the suspect, sold or renovated long ago, places where traces might survive in dust, in soil, in spaces no one thinks to clean thoroughly. Most searches yielded nothing, but one did. In a disused garage once rented under his name, investigators found fibers embedded in cracks of concrete. Fibers consistent with clothing the victim was known to wear, preserved not by intention, but by neglect, overlooked in a space frozen in time. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't cinematic. It was devastating in its quiet specificity. The suspect was informed. Again, this time, he did not ask questions. He listened, and when the list of corroborating details ended, when there was nothing left to counter with ambiguity, he closed his eyes, exhaled, and spoke a sentence that shifted the case irrevocably. He said he had never meant for it to go that far. That sentence did not absolve him. It anchored him. Intent, even denied, became present. Because outcomes do not exist without actions, and actions do not occur in isolation. The full confession followed slowly, fragmented by pauses, corrections, moments where language failed under the weight of memory. But the shape it became clear, the encounter, the loss of control, the decision afterward, not impulsive, not planned in advance, but executed with terrifying calm once it began. He described the river not as a place of disposal, but as a razor, a way to return the city to normal, to ensure that by morning, nothing would appear out of place. And in that rationale, detectives heard something colder than anger, something closer to entitlement. The statement was recorded, transcribed, signed, and in that moment, the cold case officially ceased to be cold. But the end of mystery did not bring peace. It brought aftermath. The family was told again, this time with certainty, names attached to actions, evidence replacing speculation, and their response was not the release the public imagined, but a quiet devastation, because knowing how someone died does not restore how they lived. Outside, Paris absorbed the news unevenly, shock fading into commentary, then into history, the way all stories eventually settle. And yet for those closest to it, detectives, witnesses, relatives, the case did not end. It simply changed form. Because confessions close files. They do not close wounds. And as the suspect was transferred deeper into the system, his face briefly captured by cameras, eyes hollow, expression unreadable, the city confronted a truth it rarely likes to acknowledge, that evil does not always arrive loudly, that sometimes it blends and waits and survives not through brilliance, but through patience. The letters, once the engine of revelation, were now evidence, sealed away, their power spent, but their existence lingered, a reminder that the past speaks when it is ready, not when it is convenient. And in the space left behind by that voice, another silence formed, heavier, final, the kind that follows when a question is answered too late to matter the way it should have. The confession did not end the work, it multiplied it. Because once a man admits to the sin of a crime, every edge must be tested, every word weighed against reality, and the system moves not on belief, but on verification, slow and unforgiving. Investigators replayed the recording again and again, listening not just to what was said, but to what wasn't, pauses that lingered too long, moments where language thinned and memory resisted. Because even now, with the truth nominally spoken, control remained as instinct, and control leaves fingerprints. They charted his version of events against time stamps, transit schedules, witness sightings, water levels in the river that night. Whether data archived by agencies that never imagined it would be used for something like this. And the alignment was unsettling, not perfect, but close enough to confirm that he had not invented a story to escape pressure. He had excavated one. Yet something was missing. A gap remained between the encounter and the river, a stretch of time he described vaguely, too vaguely for comfort, and detectives understood why. Because that space contained the most damning choices, the point where accident becomes decision, and decision becomes crime. When pressed on it, he retreated again, framing confusion, panic, disorientation. But the narrative strained under its own weight, because panic produces chaos, and what followed had been anything but chaotic. Routes chosen, access points known, timing precise enough to evade notice. The prosecution seized on that contradiction. They reframed the case not as an accident spiraling out of control, but as a sequence of escalating choices, each one narrowing alternatives until only one outcome remained. And in doing so, they stripped the confession of its mitigating language. Defense counsel responded predictably, challenging memory reliability, pointing to the erosion of time, the suggestibility of renewed investigation, the psychological pressure applied after decades of silence, and for a moment, doubt flickered again, because courts are not moved by narrative cohesion alone. So the evidence had to speak louder. The forensic results advanced. DNA analysis, limited but viable, returned a partial profile consistent with the victim's family lineage, not definitive on its own, but paired with a location. The fibers of confession. It became part of a chorus that no single voice could overpower. Expert witnesses prepared to testify not just to findings, but to process, explaining how conclusions were reached, how contamination was avoided, how probability tilted beyond coincidence. Because in a case like this, trust is as important as truth. Meanwhile, the letters were dissected publicly for the first time. Redacted excerpts entered the record, their tone chilling jurors before the trial even began, because unlike spoken confession, letters freeze intent in ink, preserving detachment, calculation, and in places, something close to pride. The defense attempted to distance their client from the authorship, raising questions of access, of possibility, of mimicry, but the linguistic analysis, paired with handwriting comparison and situational knowledge, tightened the noose, demonstrating not certainty in isolation, but inevitability in accumulation. Outside the courtroom, the city reacted in waves. Some expressed outrage that it had taken so long. Others questioned whether reopening the past had been worth the cost. And beneath both reactions lay an unspoken fear that the familiar streets they walked every day might still be holding stories they did not want to hear. The victim's family attended proceedings quietly. They did not seek cameras. They did not give statements. Their presence alone carried weight, a reminder that this was not an intellectual exercise, not a procedural victory, but a reckoning with loss that had never been acknowledged properly. As testimony unfolded, the suspect sat motionless, eyes forward, expression flattened into neutrality. The mask of normality he had worn for decades now hardened into something else, resignation perhaps, or relief, or simply exhaustion from carrying a secret that no longer belonged solely to him. When the letters were read aloud, the room shifted. Hearing those words spoken, stripped of anonymity, attached to a body, a face, a history, transformed them from taunt to indictment, and for the first time, the weight of his authorship settled visibly on him. The judge listened. The jury listened. Paris listened. And in that listening, the case moved closer to its final form, no longer a mystery, no longer a rumor, but a documented truth, however incomplete, however delayed. Still, even as the proceedings advanced, one question lingered, unasked but present in every silence: whether justice delivered this late could ever feel like justice at all, or whether it was simply the least imperfect option left. As the day ended and the courtroom emptied, detectives gathered their files, aware that they were nearing the end of a journey that had begun before some of them entered the profession, and that whatever verdict awaited, the case would remain with them, a reminder that time does not erase crime. It only changes how it is carried. Outside, night settled over Paris once more, lights flickering on along the river, reflections trembling in dark water that had already given up one secret and would keep countless others, indifferent to closure, immune to judgment. And somewhere in that city, life continued, altered subtly by the knowledge that the past, no matter how deeply buried, can still reach out and demand be heard. By the time the trial reached its final phase, the case no longer belonged to the detectives, or even to the court. It belonged to memory, collective and personal, a reckoning that forced everyone involved to confront what had been lost in the long gap between crime and consequence. The prosecution closed its narrative carefully, not with spectacle, but with accumulation, laying evidence side by side until the pattern became unavoidable: letters, fibers, geography, confession, remains, each one insufficient alone, devastating together. And as they spoke, they reminded the jury that cold cases do not lack truth, they lack time, and time had finally run out. The defense countered with uncertainty, emphasizing degradation, erosion, the fragility of recollection, arguing that decades distort both evidence and intent, and that the confession, filtered through pressure and hindsight, could not be trusted fully, a strategy designed not to prove innocence, but to introduce hesitation. That hesitation hung in the room as the jury retired. Hours passed, then a night, then another morning. Paris waited, media camped outside, analysts filling airtime with speculation. And for the family, the wait reopened everything, because verdicts do not just decide guilt, they decide whether a story is finally believed. When the jury returned, the room stilled. The verdict was read plainly, without flourish, because justice rarely needs emphasis when the weight of it is already understood. Guilty on all counts, a recognition not just of actions, but of years stolen, of silence imposed, of a life erased without acknowledgement. There was no outburst, no collapse. The suspect absorbed the words with stillness that felt practiced, perhaps the final adaptation of a man who had spent decades adjusting to a reality only he fully knew. And as he was led away, the case crossed its last official threshold. Sentencing followed swiftly. The judge spoke of gravity, of breach of trust, of the corrosive effect of unresolved violence on a community. And in those words, the city itself was implicated, a reminder that indifference allows secrets to survive. The sentence was severe, appropriate, late, and yet, even as it was handed down, a strange hollowness filled the room. Because no punishment can retroactively protect, no judgment can return time to its rightful owner. Outside, reactions rippled. Some called it closure. Others called it tragedy compounded. But most simply moved on, the way cities always do, because life demands momentum even when justice lags decades behind. For the detectives, the case ended not with celebration, but with quiet. Files archived once more, this time marked resolve, a word that felt inadequate given everything that had preceded it. And as they left the building, they carried with them a heaviness earned, not shed. The family visited the river, not for answers, not for confrontation, just to stand where the city had kept its secret longest, to mark a place where absence had become fact. And in that act, they reclaimed something small but essential, the right to agree with certainty rather than speculation. The letters, now evidence, were sealed permanently, their journey from anonymous provocation to legal artifact complete, and in their pages, future generations would read not just a confession, but a caution about patience used for harm, about control mistaken for power. The city slowly forgot the headlines. New stories replaced old ones. But in the architecture of Paris, in the blind spots between lights, in the quiet stretches where sound dissolves, the case left an imprint, an awareness that routine is not safety, that familiarity can be deceptive. Cold cases teach that lesson brutally. They remind us that justice is not guaranteed by time, only delayed by it, and that delay extracts a cost that no verdict can repay. As the suspect disappeared into the system, his name reduced to a record number, his voice silenced except in transcripts, the anonymous power he once wielded evaporated, leaving behind only the consequences of having spoken too late. And yet, even with guilt declared, even with punishment imposed, the story did not feel complete, because the real ending had occurred years earlier, on a winter night, when a woman walked into darkness and did not return. Everything after was aftermath. Everything after was accounting. And as Paris settled back into itself, the case lingered not as a mystery anymore, but as an echo, a reminder that the past does not vanish. It waits, and when it finally surfaces, it demands more than attention. It demands reckoning. After the verdict, time did what it always does. It moved forward without ceremony, indifferent away to what had just been decided. And that indifference was perhaps the most unsettling part, because for those who had lived inside the case, justice did not feel like an ending. It felt like a door closing slowly, deliberately, leaving a draft behind. The courtroom emptied. The cameras packed away. The city reclaimed its sidewalks. But in quieter places, offices now stripped of urgency, apartments where files once lay open late into the night, the story continued to reverberate, replaying itself in fragments that refused to align neatly. Detectives returned to routine work. New cases, new names, new urgencies, yet the old rhythms felt altered. Because once you watch time bend around crime, once you see decades collapse into a single sentence spoken aloud, your relationship with certainty changes. They thought about the first letter often. Not its content, but its timing. Why then? Why not earlier? Why wait until memory had eroded, until witnesses aged, until the victim's parents were older, until certainty itself became fragile? Psychologists offer theories: guilt surfacing late in life, fear of death, the desire to control one's narrative before it is taken away. But none of them felt sufficient, because they framed the letters as weakness, and nothing about them suggested weakness. The letters had been power exercised carefully, a way to enter the story on his own terms, to shape the reopening, to choose when the city would remember. And that realization lingered uncomfortable, because it meant that even in confession, he had retained agency longer than anyone wanted to admit. The family declined interviews. They declined public statements. Their grief did not need translation. They returned instead to ordinary acts, sorting belongings long left untouched, deciding what to keep, what to release, what could finally be acknowledged without reopening wounds that had never healed properly. In one box, they found items from 1994, unanswered letters, notes scribbled during frantic days, reminders of a time when hope was still loud, and as they held those artifacts, the distance between then and now collapsed again, proof that resolution does not diminish memory. It sharpens it. The river search site was sealed. No marker placed. No plaque installed. Paris does not like monuments to discomfort, and perhaps that was fitting, because the city's role had been passive, complicit only in its silence, and silence leaves no clean place for commemoration. Legal appeals were filed. Automatically. Procedurally. They did not carry the urgency of belief, only the necessity of process. And as they wound their way through the system, the case settled into its final legal shape, stable, immovable, no longer vulnerable to collapse. Yet one final ripple emerged. An archivist, cataloging evidence for long-term storage, noticed a discrepancy, minor, easily overlooked, a reference in the first letter to an object never recovered, something mentioned casually, almost offhand. And while it did not undermine the verdict, it raised a question that would never be answered. whether there were details still withheld, fragment of truth he chose to carry with him into silence. That possibility haunted the edges of the case, because it suggested that even at the end, full access had not been granted, that confession had been partial by design, sufficient for conviction, insufficient for total understanding. But perhaps that is always the case. Perhaps no crime ever yields itself entirely, no matter how much time or pressure is applied. As years passed, the story receded from headlines into documentaries, podcasts, academic discussions about cold cases and delayed justice, becoming an example rather than an event, a cautionary tale cited by people who had not lived it. And yet, for those who had, the case never fully closed. It simply became quieter. Its presence felt in instincts sharpened, in patience extended, in the understanding that truth is not always loud when it arrives. Paris continued to offer itself as it always had, beautiful, indifferent, layered with history that most people never see. And beneath its rhythms, beneath its routines, the knowledge remained that the past does not expire. It waits for a moment when it can no longer be ignored. The suspect, now just a man in the system, wrote no more letters. No final statement. No attempt at explanation. Silence reclaimed him. And in that silence, perhaps for the first time, control slipped entirely from his grasp, because once a story is spoken into the world, it belongs to others, shaped by their listening rather than the speaker's intent. As the decade turned and then another, the cold case faded into the background of a city always in motion. But for those who knew its contours, who could still trace the path from a blind spot on a winter night to a courtroom decades later, the story remained a reminder how fragile certainty is, and how persistent truth can be. Only one part remained unfinished. Not legally, not procedurally, but emotionally, because endings, when they arrive too late, do not resolve, they echo. Years later, when the case was no longer spoken about in the present tense, when it had settled into archives and footnotes and carefully worded summaries, it still resisted being finished. Because some stories do not end, they recede, leaving behind a pressure you only feel when the noise dies down. The apartment where she had last been seen was occupied by someone else now. Furniture rearranged, walls repainted, life layered over absence, and yet the geometry of the space remained unchanged, the doorway where a bag had once been set down, the corridor that had swallowed routine and returned nothing. And for those who knew the case, those details lingered like coordinates on a map that no longer needed to be followed. The blind spot still existed. Lights had been upgraded, angles adjusted, but the shadow remained, thinner now, less forgiving, a reminder that safety is often an illusion maintained by habit rather than certainty, and that cities learn only after being confronted with what they allow to slip through. The river continued its work. It carried reflections, not memory. It did not acknowledge what it had given back or what it still held. And in that indifference lay a truth the case had exposed repeatedly, that nature does not judge. It only preserves and erases according to its own rules. The detectives moved on. Some retired. Some trained new officers who knew the case only as a lesson, a reminder to look twice, to document carefully, to respect the quiet details that rarely demand attention but later become everything. And when asked about it, they did not speak of triumph. They spoke of timing, of patience, of the cost of waiting too long to listen. The letters were never displayed. They remained sealed, referenced but unseen, their words reduced to citations and summaries, because some things lose power when repeated, and those pages had already done enough damage in their brief reemergence. The man who wrote them aged in obscurity. No interviews, no public reckoning. His story ended where it began, in control slipping quietly away, not through spectacle, but through exposure, the slow realization that secrets kept for decades do not belong to those who keep them. They belong to the moment they surface. The family marked anniversaries differently now, not with questions, with names, with certainty. They spoke of her without qualifiers, without the language of disappearance, because she was no longer missing, she was gone, and that distinction, painful as it was, allowed grief to finally take a shape it had been denied for too long. Paris absorbed the case the way it absorbs all things, unevenly, imperfectly, carrying it forward in memory only when prompted, when a documentary aired late at night, when an article resurfaced, when someone walked along the river and felt, without knowing why, that something there had once mattered deeply. Cold cases are often described as puzzles. This one was not. It was a delay. A silence maintained by routine, by assumptions, by the belief that time itself might resolve what people could not. And when that silence finally broke, it did not explode. It whispered through paper, through hesitation, through a voice that had waited until it believed it could still choose how to be heard. The truth arrived incomplete, as it always does. But it arrived, and that arrival changed the shape of the past, if not its weight. Because justice, when delayed, does not restore, it acknowledges, it names, it records, and in doing so, it prevents erasure from becoming acceptance. The city moved on. The case closed. But the echo remained, in the understanding that answers can come too late to heal, yet still matter because they refuse to let absence be the final word. On a winter night, much like the one that began it all, the streets of Paris fell quiet again, footsteps echoing briefly before fading, shadows stretching and dissolving under streetlights that now overlap more carefully, and somewhere between routine and memory, the story settled into its final form, not as a mystery, not as a headline, but as a reminder that silence is not emptiness, that waiting is not forgetting, and that even after decades, the past can still speak softly, insistently, demanding to be heard, whether we are ready or not. Long after the files were stamped and shelved, after the final signatures dried and the last pressed questions lost their edge, the case continued to breathe in quieter places, in the pauses between conversations, in the way certain streets were crossed a little faster, in the instinctive glance over a shoulder when night settled too heavily on the river. Nothing official recorded this phase, because it belonged to no institution, no timeline, only to the people who had carried the weight long enough for it to leave an imprint. A former investigator once admitted, off the record, that closure was a word invented to make unfinished things tolerable, that even solved cold cases leave residue, a fine dust of doubt that settles into memory and resurfaces without warning. He said it happened when he heard the sound of paper sliding through a mail slot, when he smelled damp stone after rain, when silence lingered a second too long in a room. The confession had answered the central question, but it also opened smaller ones, quieter ones, the kind that never make headlines but refuse to disappear. Why then? Why not sooner? Why a letter and not a voice? The anonymous envelope had been analyzed, archived, cross-checked until it was reduced to data points and conclusions, yet its most unsettling quality remained untouched, the deliberateness of its timing, the sense that it had arrived not when truth was strongest, but when resistance was weakest. Age had done what interrogation never could. Time had softened edges, eroded certainty, and left behind a man who no longer trusted his own silence to protect him. The city never learned the full contents of those pages. It learned enough to talk, enough to argue, enough to split public opinion between relief and unease, between those who believed the past should stay buried and those who understood that burial without acknowledgement is only postponement. Radio hosts debated it in clipped segments between traffic updates. Opinion columns framed it as a victory, then questioned the cost. In cafes, the story surfaced mid-conversation, introduced casually, then lowered into whispers, as if volume alone could summon what it described. Some nights, the river police still reported nothing. Other nights, they reported everything. Unrelated incidents, false alarms, objects mistaken for remains. Each call reopened a muscle memory no one wanted to exercise again, and each time the answer came back negative, there was relief, followed immediately by guilt for feeling it. The case had trained the city to expect the unexpected, to understand that the surface tells only part of the story, and that what lies beneath is patient. The family avoided interviews, not out of anger, out of exhaustion. They had learned that stories, once released, do not return intact, that each retelling reshapes grief into something consumable, and they had already given enough. In private, they spoke of ordinary things, of habits you would have mocked, of jokes that no longer landed the same way. And sometimes, in moments they never discussed, they imagined a version of life that had continued uninterrupted, not as fantasy, but as a quiet act of remembrance. The man responsible faded from relevance. His name appeared briefly, then less often, then only in legal context and academic discussions about delayed confessions and the psychology of guilt. He was not remembered as he might have wanted to be, not powerful, not clever, but diminished, reduced to a footnote attached to an act he could not outlive. And still, something lingered, a sense that the case had not concluded so much as stabilized, that it had stopped bleeding openly but continued to ache beneath the surface. Cold cases, even when solved, change the temperature of a place. They remind a city of its vulnerabilities, of the spaces between routine where harm can hide, of the thin lines separating anonymity from erasure. On certain evenings, when the lights along the Seine reflect too cleanly on the water, when footsteps echo just a fraction longer than expected, the memory of 1994 feels closer than it should, not as fear, but as awareness, a collective understanding that time does not dissolve responsibility. It only delays confrontation. This was never just a story about a crime. It was a story about waiting, about what happens when truth is deferred long enough to feel optional, about the moment it returns anyway, uninvited, undeniable, asking to be acknowledged even if it can no longer repair what was broken. The file number remains. The dates remain. The city remains. And somewhere between what was lost and what was finally named, the case continues to exist not as an open question, but as a presence, a reminder that even when silence lasts decades, it is never absolute, because the past does not disappear. It watches, it waits, and when it speaks, even softly, it changes everything. There are stories that refuse to accept the final punctuation placed at the end of them, stories that continue not because facts are missing, but because understanding lags behind truth. And this one lingered in that narrow space, suspended between what had been proven and what could never be fully known. Long after the confession entered the record, after the language of certainty replaced the language of speculation, the city still reacted to the case as if it were unfinished, as if something essential had slipped past unnoticed. It surfaced in training rooms and lecture halls, projected onto white screens in the form of grainy photographs and redacted transcripts, dissected line by line for what it revealed, and more importantly, for what it concealed. Students were told this was a solved cold case, and then watched as their instructors hesitated before explaining why the word solved did not feel complete. Because proof had arrived late, because witnesses had aged into unreliability, because memory, one stretched across decades, becomes less a record and more a reconstruction. Somewhere in those discussions, the letter returned again and again, not its contents, its existence, the fact that a single envelope, small enough to be overlooked, had altered the trajectory of a case that entire departments had failed to move, that it had arrived without warning, without return address, without apology, carrying with a decision made in isolation after years of deliberate silence. Investigators spoke about it as a catalyst, but privately, many described it as an intrusion, an act that reclaimed control at the last possible moment, allowing the author to dictate how the truth entered the world. The city's relationship with the case shifted subtly after that. People stopped asking who. They started asking how it had been allowed to last so long. New attention fell on overlooked procedures, on outdated assumptions, on the quiet bias that had once dismissed certain details as insignificant. The blind spots were no longer physical alone. They were institutional, cultural, human. A missing report here, a witness dismissed there, a detail categorized as noise instead of signal. None of them fatal on their own. Together, decisive. There were nights when former officers replayed those early hours in their minds, not as a professional exercise, but as a personal reckoning. The first interviews, the early searches, the confidence that there would be time to circle back, to recheck, to verify. Time, they had learned too late, does not wait to be used responsibly. It moves forward, carrying evidence with it, eroding edges, softening certainty, until what remains can only be interpreted, not confirmed. The family, distant from these analyses, experienced the aftermath differently. For them, the case had not evolved, it had simply changed weight. The burden of not knowing had been replaced by the burden of knowing too late. They navigated a strange reversal, where sympathy arrived after endurance, where condolences came when strength had already been exhausted. People spoke to them with relief in their voices, unaware that relief was not what they felt. They felt permanence, a fixed point where hope could no longer exist. And yet, There was something grounding in that finality, something that allowed memory to settle without constantly being interrupted by speculation. They began to reclaim her story in small ways, correcting casual inaccuracies, resisting dramatization, insisting on ordinariness with a world-preferred myth. She was not a symbol. She was a person whose absence had shaped decades. Paris, for its part, continued forward as it always does, layered and indifferent, absorbing tragedy into its rhythm without ever fully erasing it. Tourists passed through places that once held significance, unaware of the histories embedded beneath their footsteps. Locals moved through the same spaces with vague awareness, a sense that some streets carried echoes not audible but persistent. Cold cases do that. Even when resolved, they alter the emotional geography of a place. They remind people that resolution does not arrive on time, that justice is often reactive rather than preventive, and that certainty, when delayed, becomes something different, heavier, less capable of comfort. The man at the center of it all became quieter in public discourse, but louder in academic ones, cited in studies about delayed guilt, about the psychology of confession, about the ways people negotiate accountability when consequences feel abstracted by time. His choice to speak had closed one chapter while opening others, not about the crime itself, but about the mechanisms that allow crimes to age into obscurity. And beneath all of it, the case continued to exist as a reference point, a reminder used carefully, a warning delivered without theatrics. That silence can masquerade as resolution. That unanswered questions do not fade, they accumulate. That sometimes the most dangerous period in an investigation is not the chaos at the beginning, but the calm that follows, when attention drifts and assumptions settle in. The Paris 1994 cold case was no longer unsolved, but it was not finished either. It had become something else. A shadow cast backward across time, reshaping how the past was read, how the present was guarded, and how the future would be questioned, not with certainty, but with vigilance, shaped by the knowledge that truth, no matter how delayed, has a way of returning, and when it does, it demands more than acknowledgement. It demands accountability. And it leaves behind a silence that feels different than before, heavier, more deliberate, carrying with it the understanding that some answers arrive not to comfort, but to remind us what waiting costs. By the time the case reached this stage, it had shed the urgency that once defined it and taken on a quieter, more unsettling permanence, the kind that seeps into institutional memory and refuses to leave. It was no longer pursued, no longer debated with raised voices, but it lingered as a reference, invoked when decisions felt too comfortable, when assumptions threatened to harden into doctrine. Its name became shorthand for hesitation, for the cost of delay, for the danger of believing that time itself can be neutral. In police briefings, it surfaced without ceremony, a slide, a date, a reminder. No one dramatized it anymore. There was no need. The facts spoke with enough weight on their own. A disappearance dismissed too quickly. Early confidence that proved unfounded. Years where the case existed only as paperwork and unanswered phone calls. And finally, the letter, arriving not as an act of courage, but as an admission shaped by erosion, by age, by the slow collapse of certainty that had once sustained silence. What unsettled investigators most was not what the confession revealed, but how little it disrupted the man's daily life before it arrived. He had lived among others, participated in routines, occupied space without suspicion, a reminder that the line between the visible and concealed is thinner than most are willing to acknowledge. He had not been pursued relentlessly. He had waited, and waiting, in this case, had worked longer than anyone wanted to admit. The city absorbed this truth unevenly. Some rejected it outright, insisting that the past had been corrected, that the system had ultimately functioned as intended. Others felt something closer to betrayal, not by individuals, but by process, by the collective willingness to accept ambiguity as stability. The case forced an uncomfortable reckoning with the idea that resolution does not equate to prevention, that answers discovered decades later do nothing to protect those who never benefited from them. In quieter corners, the story changed shape. It became less about a crime and more about endurance, about the way uncertainty stretches grief into something unrecognizable, about families who learn to function without closure, only to receive it when it no longer fits neatly into their lives. The family did not attend conferences where the case was discussed. They did not watch the documentaries that revisited it with polished narration and controlled pacing. Their relationship with the story had long since diverged from public consumption. For them, the truth had arrived stripped of context, devoid of ceremony, and had demanded acceptance without offering relief. They spoke of her less often now, but more clearly, not in fragments, not in speculation, but in memory, grounded and unembellished. The city, meanwhile, continued its rituals. Trains ran, cafes opened, the river reflected the sky with practiced indifference. Life moved forward, as it always does, carrying traces of what came before without pausing to acknowledge them. And yet, in moments of stillness, the kind that arrive late at night or early in the morning, the awareness returned, the understanding that beneath routine lies accumulation, layers of unresolved history that shape behavior even when unnamed. Cold cases are often described as dormant. This one proved they are not. They are active, quietly influencing decisions, shaping caution, redefining trust. They alter how institutions train their people, how communities interpret absence, how silence is weighed. The Paris 1994 case did not end when it was solved. It transformed into a cautionary presence, a reference point that resisted simplification. There were those who argued the letter should never have been written, that confession without consequence serves only the conscience of confessor. Others countered that truth delayed is still preferable to truth denied, that naming responsibility, even late, prevents disappearance from becoming a permanent condition. The debate never settled. It didn't need to. Its persistence was proof that the case still mattered. And through it all, the unanswered fragments remained, not about what happened, but about why it took so long to matter. Those questions did not demand immediate responses. They waited, embedded in policy revisions, in revised protocols, in the subtle shift toward skepticism when early certainty appeared too convenient. The case had taught a generation that confidence must be earned repeatedly, not assumed, and that every unanswered detail carries potential weight. As time moved forward, the story receded further into background, no longer urgent, no longer fresh, but never entirely gone. It existed as a low hum beneath the city's noise, a reminder that history is not something left behind, but something carried, reshaped by acknowledgement and neglect alike. And in that hum, barely audible but persistent, was a lesson no one articulated aloud. That waiting has consequences, that silence is a choice, and that even when truth finally arrives, it does not erase what time has taken. It only illuminates it.